Hello. The purpose of this short video is to provide testing administrators and proctors with some common scenarios that occur in terms of interactions with students during testing. We're going to just show some scenarios that we've encountered in the past. We want to point a few things out about our testing environment before we begin our scenarios. First of all, as you can see, anything that would be related to testing on the boards behind me has been removed. And our two students here, Tammy and Donna, are at a very small table. We would want to make sure in testing, if actual testing were going on, that the two of them would be appropriately separated. They're going to act as our students, and I'm going to act as the teacher. We're going to walk you through a handful of scenarios. We're going to show you appropriate interactions with the students and inappropriate actions with the students.
Mr. Rosley?
What's up, Tammy?
My calculator's not working.
Oh, really? Okay, let me take a look at it real quick. Let me just see your test book real quick here. Okay, I'll tell you what, I'm going to go get you another calculator. Okay. So the scenario that we just went through is obviously the student's calculator wasn't working. What we just demonstrated is an inappropriate way to handle the situation because the teacher was looking not only at the student's test booklet, multiple pages in the test booklet, but also at the answer document, which we don't want administrators or proctors to do. So the appropriate way to have handled this situation would have been to either grab an extra calculator that hopefully is in the classroom, or if there isn't an extra calculator in the classroom for some reason, send one of the adults who's in the room to find an extra calculator. Donna, I'm just going to leave the room for maybe 10, 15 minutes. You're in charge while I'm gone. Thanks. So we want to address a couple things, and hopefully did address two things in that scenario. First, as the teacher, or as the administrator in this case, I was sitting at my makeshift desk with an absent student's test booklet, and I was thumbing through the test booklet. If a student is absent, what we want the administrator to do is keep that test booklet secure until the time comes to return all of the test booklets and answer documents to the appropriate place that the school has designated. The other piece that happened there is, as the only administrator in the room, although we encourage two adults at all times, but in this case, with me being the only administrator in the room, it obviously would not be appropriate for me to leave the room during testing for any time, much less an extended period of time, and ask one of the students to be in charge of the classroom. What's up, Tammy?
I really messed up.
What's wrong?
Well, I was going to bubble it in, but there's no place.
Oh, okay, right. So we're in reading language
and I
arts.
think I'm in the wrong thing.
Yeah, you've been
What
bubbling.
do?
Well, it's no big deal. Just take this blank sheet of paper, just number 70 through 75, since there are 75 questions in reading language arts.
Okay.
Just put the letter next to the number
Okay.
for your answer, and then afterwards we'll take care of it.
Okay.
Okay?
That sounds good.
Okay, great. So this is a scenario that we hear about usually multiple times during test administrations where students end up either bubbling in the wrong section entirely, or they might start one column to the right on their answer document to the point where they don't have enough space left to bubble in all of their answers to the test questions. So a couple things to point out with this. First, it's a good opportunity when you're actually giving your students the instructions before the test to make sure of a few things. Number one, that the test booklet and the answer document are the same color to make sure that they actually have the appropriate answer document. Also, just reminding the students of which section they're in and having them do a quick check to make sure that, for example, if you're doing reading language arts, the student's actually bubbling in the reading language arts section. But what we don't want to happen, if a student brings it to a teacher's attention that this has happened, we don't want the teacher to thumb through the test booklet or start erasing things on the student's answer document. just, and this is almost 90% of the time, this is exactly what any proctor or test administrator does or teacher does, is just take a blank piece of paper, set the student up to answer the remaining questions, and then afterwards in the presence of another adult, either the proctor can transcribe the letters to the appropriate location on the answer document, or the student can also do it if the proctor thinks that's appropriate, as long as, again, the student does it in the presence of the adult. And Tammy, really make sure that you're thinking about these, especially if you look at this one right here, just kind of think about what you're doing, all right? Okay. Donna, stay with me now. Keep working. Keep going. You're doing a good job. So we get questions about how proctors should interact with students every year. And really, we understand that there are nuances to this. It's not a black and white situation. Depends on a lot of things. Whether you're talking about a second grader or an eighth grader, what the circumstances are. A couple things to point out here. We definitely encourage that proctors are walking around. Obviously, our scenario here with just 2 students at a small table makes that a little bit difficult to sort of give an example, but the goal of my sort of walking in and out was as if I was moving around a classroom. My first interaction with Tammy, as you noticed, I kind of stood over her shoulder. I was looking at her test booklet, looking at her answer document. I kind of pointed down at her answer document and really told her to make sure she was paying attention. That's not to say that every time a proctor does that, there's anything, dishonest going on. But it could give the perception that what the proctor is doing is helping the student with a specific question, which obviously we don't want proctors to do, because that would be cheating. My second interaction, though, with Donna was a situation, and particularly we hear about this from proctors, from teachers with younger students, especially second graders, third graders, where we know we're asking these kids to focus, these students to focus, and really for a decent period of time, pay attention to what they're doing, and some kids just struggle with that more than others. So the purpose of my just pat on Donna's shoulder and not really looking at her test, but just sort of looking at her and saying, Donna, stay focused, stay with me, you're doing a good job, giving that positive reinforcement, that's completely appropriate. So we definitely don't discourage that. Obviously, if you're talking about an eighth grader who has maybe just sort of determined for whatever reason that he or she desires not to test, then it's a little bit of a different situation in terms of how you interact. So we know that these situations aren't black and white, but there are some basic things that, based on our experience, good proctors do, and specifically, trying not to or not looking at a test booklet and an answer document, just sort of giving more general guidance to a student, we find is the more effective approach. So we won't really be acting out this last scenario. This is more just to provide some information. So we're aware that the SAT-10, which we're now referring to as our K2 assessment, was given on a large scale for the first time really in several years this past spring. And we know that just based on feedback that we received, there was some confusion for proctors who were maybe more used to not necessarily administering 3/8 assessments, although that could have been the case, but just sort of anecdotally hearing about how tests were administered by higher grade teachers. So what we want to make sure that people understand is that the teacher instructions that are associated with the K2 assessment, which you'll all be receiving this spring, are very explicit in terms of what the proctor should say and how the proctor should interact with students. So if you look in at the teacher directions, anything that the teacher should say or do is clearly written in bold, and so really we just want to make sure that we're letting folks know that we want you to pay attention to what's in the book. Don't expand upon what the instructions ask you to do. We know that this involves testing younger children, and so the instructions are purposely written very explicitly so that the students will have what is hopefully a clear understanding of how to actually take the test, and obviously the proctor will have a clear understanding of how to administer the test to the students. Obviously, if a student is using their iPhone or any other inappropriate device to take pictures of their test booklet, confiscate the phone immediately. do allow the student to continue with that section of the test and report the situation to the appropriate building administrator. Similarly, if you see a student using their phone or any other inappropriate device and attempting to look up answers to questions, confiscate the device, report the situation to the appropriate administrator, do allow the student to continue with that portion of the test, and then address the situation when the test is completed.